Camera's up and running. Alright, since we're up and live, you can see the screen, so let's go live. Hello. I am Jeremiah McCoy. I am Basics of the Game on TikTok and here. So I've been trying to make a habit of coming on and doing reviews of role-playing games. And one I've been meaning to get to for a very long time is Star Trek Adventures. The thing with Star Trek Adventures is that it is, well, let's go back to the beginning. Star Trek, of course, started in the 1960s with Gene Roddenberry's TV show that got pushed through as much as anything by Lucille Ball, who fought for it with the production company, interestingly enough. And it has become a cultural phenomenon. I think most people in the world are familiar with the basics of Star Trek. And there's something very appealing about the sort of aspirational elements of the setting. No, it isn't hard science fiction. And yes, it is perhaps a little unbelievable in how perfect the society operates. But that is part of its appeal. That it presents a future that we kind of wish would happen. In the 1980s, there was a Star Trek role-playing game called Star Trek role-playing game, I think, by FASA. And I remember playing it and was a little, just a little disenchanted with it. I think because the rules were not particularly, they didn't grab you. And the setting was one where I thought it was great, but if you... Oh, hello. Nice to see a new viewer up there. Thanks for stopping in. Anyways, yeah, so the 1980s FASA Star Trek role-playing game, I played it some. And there were some conflicts in the game where people were, complaining about not being in the captain or what have you. So I thought, maybe this isn't a game that can be done, right? This isn't a role-playing game that can be done. And I had that opinion for a long time. Modiphius came out with this Star Trek Adventures, which I have the physical book, in 2018. And I was, a little bit, doubtful that they could make it work because of my previous experience with other Star Trek role-playing games. One of the things that turned me around on it, though, was watching some shows by Eric Campbell as the DM, one on Geek and Sundry, called Shields of Tomorrow, which had Eric Campbell, it had Amy Dallin, it had Sam, I'm going to mess up their name, Levere, and it was using this rule set, and it was brilliant. It was well done, and I was like, okay, well, maybe they can do it. So at the 2018 Gen Con, I picked up this book. And my first thought was, I'm going to read this and review it. You will notice we are 2 years later. So it took me a while. It took me a while to get to this. And you know what? The Modiphius has actually sent me some PDFs. So I'm probably going to be reviewing portions of this game for a while, honestly. It's going to pop up a lot as I do these reviews. Um, I will start off the review by giving you the conclusion first, which is I really enjoyed this game. I think it is just the right kind of mesh. I have not tried Iron Sworn. I have seen it, but I haven't tried it yet. Um, it's on my list, but I haven't tried it yet. Um, but anyways, the thing I like about the this game is that the system doesn't try and force it into the a particular system paradigm, but rather tries to reflect the paradigm of the show. So, for instance, the task system in here is about establishing what the task is, uh, and providing conflicts into that task, and you do your check to see if you can succeed. And sometimes this generates complications, narrative problems for you going forward that you have to solve for any future checks. It's not as straightforward as, roll a percentile and see if you succeed. It becomes a much more back and forth interplay between the game master and the players. Um, the fact that the system isn't strictly focused on combat like a lot of role playing games are, because, well, it's Star Trek, and Star Trek isn't completely focused on uh, on combat. It's about a bunch of science explorers out in space. Yes, combat comes up, and they do have combat rules, but they don't focus the rules system completely on that. It's much more about solving problems. And that is really satisfying. Um, Let me dig into the system a bit. One thing that needs to be said up front is that the D20 system is going to be kind of a reverse of what you're used to, if you're used to, say, D&D, in one very important respect. Rolling your D20, you want to get low, not high. So what you're rolling is your attribute. You're rolling your a couple of D20s plus extra D20s depending on the circumstances, and you're comparing the result against your attribute plus a discipline. So an attribute would be something like daring, and your discipline would be the area that you are trained in, like security. So daring plus security, and you want to roll less than that. You can add different more d20s due to various uh, elements of your character, or you can spend momentum, and I'll get into what momentum is, or other things that will give you more d20s to roll. The determination of whether or not you succeed is based on the difficulty of the task. The difficulty determines the number of successes you need. Now, somebody who's familiar with the system will no doubt tell me that I am oversimplifying it, and I am. There is a surprising amount of uh, system depth to this for a game that is very narrative in its design structure. So that ends up meaning that I'm going to gloss over some sections. So, a few things I really like about this. Because the system is so narrative and abstracted, you can use it to reflect a wide range of things, from trying to investigate a scientific mystery on a planet to maybe having a battle between ships, to trying to solve somebody's personal problems by helping them work through their issues. All of these things are handled pretty well with the system that they have put in place. The character creation is interesting as well. It uses a life path system, and I do love a good life path system. Life paths were pretty popular when I first started getting into role playing games in the first place. Um, a life path system is you start with some basic stuff, and as you go through, you add different life events, and these life events give you certain traits, and this is how you build up your character. Which is, if you're used to Pathfinder, D&D, even some of the World of Darkness games, that's going to be very different than what you're doing here. Cyberpunk uses this a little bit. Fate, it's particularly Spirit of the Century, was one that I saw this similar sort of thing in. A life path not only gives you your character, but it also gives context to your character. Why you have traits. Why you're that way. It gives you a background to work with. So it combines a lot of different things. So I really love a good life path system. And this one has one. You are making choices, but if you don't want to make choices in the life path system, it does give you the option to roll. They do give you a limited number of alien races that you are able to start out as. Let me see. I've got the book in front of me. Let me pull it up. The different races that you can start out as are things like Vulcan, Human, Trill, Tellarite, Betazoid, Danubian, Andorian, and Bajoran. The limited number of races in the main book might be putting off to people. They do give you some rules about defining other races in there, and the line is well supported. So there are a lot of books out for Star Trek Adventures. So you might find one of the other alien races from the various Star Trek shows in there, and you might pick one of them to play. Plus, they have a section about the sort of traditional enemies of the Federation, and you could end up playing one of them as well, like a Klingon or a Cardassian, something like that. And because it's Star Trek, it's very inclusive. They make a good point of trying to keep the language very much on point of it doesn't matter how you identify, religion, place of birth, nothing really would prevent you from being a member of the Federation. So that is repeatedly hit upon in the rule book, and I'm glad of it. The other thing that I think the rule book really does very well is gives you a feel of being in universe. A lot of role-playing games are very good at giving you a somewhat dry description of the rules. This is how you do this. This is how you do that. But they don't do a good job of embedding you in the world. Star Trek Adventures almost does too good a job. Because we're all sort of familiar with Star Trek, right? We all grew up watching Star Trek. The reruns have been in syndication since around the time I was born. The Star Trek movies have consistently done well at the box office. There have been several series. There's currently series running. We all know Star Trek. I mean, it's very rare to find somebody who has never encountered it, never actually developed any familiarity in it. So why do you need a lot of rich immersion in the book? But they put it in there. The first 50 pages or so are sort of establishing the baseline knowledge of what you should know in the setting. The main book is, in fact, set in Next Generation era. There are separate books to help you play in other time frames. And, you know, I think Next Generation is probably the most interesting era to play in. But yeah, I could see the appeal of playing in Enterprise era or original series era. Um, but they put a lot of the details in there so that you will know what somebody in that time frame would know. They do a lot with just the layout. There is something called LCARS, which is the sort of black with colorful curved line uh, menus that you are familiar with from Star Trek. Um, and you can see occasionally on the screen what I'm talking about, where it comes up and does the sort of swoop design and menuing like you're reading it on a computer. Even if you're not, it looks like it when you're reading it. It looks very much like an in-world artifact, which helps sort of drive home the feel of the setting that you're trying to play in, which is nice. It includes lots of odd little interstitial story elements that feel like part of the shows without actually taking you out too much. Some of the examples that they give of the system are actually incidents from the TV shows, and they're showing you how to describe it with the system, which is also very nice. So yeah, they really double over to try and make sure you are invested in this world, to an extent that most of the RPGs I've seen don't. There are a few. Shadowrun does a good job of it. A couple of others, but I think this game has put more effort into making you feel like part of that world than any other role-playing game I can think of in recent years. And I should add that the artwork is excellent. The artwork is representative and interesting. It's got lots of artwork of the different ships. It's got lots of action shots. It is an appealing book to look at, an appealing book to read. So I you're not going to regret picking it up. There's some books I've seen where you pick it up and you're like, well, this is a slog to read through, but the quality may be good. This one actually has some really good quality to go along with all of this pretty book. So I've been overall very pleased with it. They include rules for combat, of course, doing scientific discovery. They actually detail it out like the scientific method. So, you develop a hypothesis, test it, and continue forward. They have rules for dealing with ships, because you would need to. I mean, it's Star Trek. That's kind of their thing. And it frames everything as a series of locations on that ship. You have the different systems, and your different crew members can improve the various systems of the ship, the different locations in the ship. And through the course of play, you can do that. Now, I talked about the system for dice mechanics, right? You roll 2d20 or more d20s depending on the things that you can do to give you extra dice to roll. And you're trying to reach a target number that is less than your attribute plus your discipline. And then you're adding up your successes, and if you get more successes than the difficulty, well, those extra successes get added into something called momentum. Momentum is a pool of successes that you can spend for things like adding a die to your die roll, or to make certain effects happen in a scene. This is not unlike, I guess, a fate point from Fate, if you're familiar with that. But it's not as free form as that. They do give you a set of things that you can spend it for. But there's also a pool for the Game Master called a threat pool, which is a pool of dice that they can pull on to do certain effects. And you can voluntarily add to their threat pool to get more dice to roll to achieve a function, which means that you're increasing the stakes, increasing the narrative pressure, so that there's more and more tension as you go along, and finally this may go against you in a bad way. And that's what those dice are there to simulate. And that back and forth is what I particularly like. It allows for a lot of dramatic tension. The combat is a little bit abstracted. They talk about using zones for combat. So anything that's within reach is melee. Anything outside of reach is not. You can use ranged weapons on melee targets or ranged targets, whichever you feel like. And they establish the ranges beyond that as zones. So you can have a medium, close, long range, and they have different zones that you can fit within. And these zones each have different terrain features as well. So you could maybe use the zone that you're in and have the cover aspect to it, and use that cover to make it harder for other people to shoot at you, as an example. Again, I'm kind of glossing over the combat, giving you a rough estimate here. There's a lot more to it, but I'm giving you kind of an idea of what that might look like. The ship creation rules are in here, where you have base models and then you can add improvements to them, which is neat. And each player is going to play a member of this crew. And the different members of the crews have different responsibilities, different disciplines that they are good at. So your security guy may be good at that discipline that goes with that. Or they could be good at science and discipline, or what have you. Or science and security, what have you. But the life path gives you those skills and establishes what career you end up in. You won't end up with a lot of doubled up. So you're not going to have two captains. You might have a captain and an XO, but you're not going to end up with a bunch of engineers and no medical, or a bunch of engineers and no security, or a bunch of security and no engineers. It's intended to give you different people filling different roles, and those different roles are not just for away teams, but also for the maintenance of the ship. Another interesting element that is here that I haven't seen a lot of games do is, so there is the support cast. So say you're the medical person on your group, and there is no reason for the ship's doctor to go on the initial away team. There's just no reason for it. But you don't want to leave the player out. So instead of playing their normal character, they grab one of the support characters. Now, if it's an existing support character, you'll already have the stats for it, and you'll be good to go. but you can just create that character and have them available for every time you want to use them. So, a support character in this context, if you're familiar with Star Trek, The Next Generation, a good example of a support character from that show was Chief O'Brien. Now, he got upgraded to being a full character on DS9, but in Next Generation, he reoccurred every so often as a support character. He was the guy, he's a chief engineer. And in Star Trek Adventures, if you were, Dr. Crusher on the ship, you might not go on the away mission, so you'll take a Miles O'Brien. And I think that's a neat way to get around the notion that there are people who are playing their characters, and their characters are not really given to certain kinds of conflicts, and still give them something to do. So, say you've got your security character who's very good combat person and doesn't want to deal with, is not really good, well suited to a diplomatic incident. Well, okay, you have that player play like a linguist from the ship who is sitting in on the diplomatic meeting. And the system allows you to create the character for that support character on the fly relatively quickly so that you can have them available. These support characters are not as awesome as the main characters, though you can spend some of your advancement points to improve support characters. So if you want to improve the combat capability of your security chief, who is not a main character, but you happen to have him as a support character that gets, revisited over and over again, you can do that, which is neat. You can also spend some of your advancement points on improving the ship. It uses a milestone advancement. There's no experience points or anything like that. It is actually a situation where you are just reaching a certain story point. Some of them are personal, some of them are story arcs, and once you achieve these, you can spin those milestones for certain effects. Some of those effects are improving your character, and some of them are improving the ship or improving some support characters. So it's really a less siloed version of advancement than you'll see in a lot of role-playing games. But I've been impressed with it. More than anything at this point, it's a game I want to play. That is that's my takeaway from it. I picked this up in 2018 and I thought, okay, I will read this and see if I can find a group to play in. And I didn't find a lot of people to play with, and I just sort of flipped through it. And then, but I enjoyed watching Shields of Tomorrow. I would drop in and watch that from time to time. Eric Campbell now has a show out called Clear Skies, which is another Star Trek adventure show with similar cast members. And they were excellent. I cannot upsell him as a DM enough. Honestly, for this game in particular, he is the Matt Mercer level for Star Trek Adventures. He is someone that I would go to and say, all right, I want to see how this game is supposed to look. I might go to him. There's a whole side conversation about the Mercer effect, which I think is overstated. But the fact that he has run 2 long-running Star Trek adventure games, and they're both excellent, emphasizing all the things that you want to be emphasized in Star Trek: interpersonal relationships, scientific discovery, wonder. These are all things that you want to be part of your game in Star Trek. And he does a good job with that. If you ever want to see how the game is played, I recommend going and watch them. But I would see those, but I didn't have anybody playing. And Modifius started sending me review stuff when I did a review a while back of one of their other games, John Carter of Mars. And I felt bad about the fact that I hadn't gotten around to reviewing them. And then a friend of mine started playing it, and I had gotten back into doing reviews of games, and I was like, all right, I'm going to finally get around to doing this. So I'm here to tell you that Star Trek Adventures is excellent. Let me think. Am I missing something that I should have mentioned up front? Oh, main die types that you're using. You're using D20s, hence the 2D20 title. And you are also going to have some specialized D6s, which are called challenge dice. And they're used for certain kinds of effects like combat damage. Different kinds of damages will roll a certain number of these challenge dice, and depending on what you roll on those dice will determine the level of effect. But they're not straight D6s, though they give you instructions on how to interpret a straight D6. But it's much more like fate dice in that regard. But those are the dice that you're using. Let's see. Do I still have viewers? Have I bored you all? I may have bored people. And if I have, I apologize. I don't mean to be boring. But let me see here. As I said, there are a rather large number of supplements. This is a super well supported game. There is a starter box set out there for those people who just want to dip their toe in and see how it plays. There is a range of supplements around the different divisions on the ship. So engineering, science, and so on. There are supplements describing the different quadrants of the Milky Way galaxy. So the Alpha Quadrant, the Beta Quadrant, those elements are there as well. And there are books about different alien species that you might encounter. Different alien worlds that you might encounter. So there's a lot of material that has been written for this game. And I would say that outside of Pathfinder and D&D, this is probably one of the most widely supported games out there as far as just raw material out there for you to buy. I will probably be doing reviews of a few more of those books because I have them. Modifius was nice enough to send them to me, and I really kind of love this game. I want to get into a game and play a game, and I will have to look around and see if I can find somebody to run it for me, somebody in my circle. But yeah, it's I say I would like to play this game. Part of me would like to run this game, but I'm already running a couple of D&D games, and I suspect I would have to sacrifice one of them to do it. But it might be worth it because it's a really neat game. The mechanics are more narrative. The world is something I'm deeply familiar with. I mean, I've watched all the TV shows except for I have not seen Picard yet because I don't have the streaming service. But the um, I read a bunch of the novels. I was one of those kids that would buy the technical manuals and read them voraciously, like they were actual technical manuals. I used to do that when I was growing up. So this is a setting that's close to my heart. And yeah, I can't say enough nice things about it. Um, I am unlikely to ever review a game and tell you, well, that game sucked. Because if it sucked, I'm not going to spend that much time on it. But with a game like this, I am, you know, I'm going to be enthusiastic about encouraging people to pick it up and try it. I think it's one of my favorite games I've read this year, and I've read some good ones. So yeah. Anyway, it doesn't look like I have anybody else watching, so I'm going to probably wrap this up. This is a little shorter than I intended it to be, um, but if you see this on YouTube later and you have comments, please leave a comment. If you have questions, please do that. I do have a Patreon, which I will include a link on for in my YouTube channel, but it's uh, Jeremiah McCoy over on Patreon. And I do have a coffee. If you want to buy me a coffee, that'll also be included in the links. And feel free to follow me on TikTok if you haven't already. And follow me on Twitter. I am Tech Noir on Twitter. But please, I hope people enjoy this game and check it out. And I hope to review more of the supplements here in the near future because I've really enjoyed this game and I want to play this game. Yeah, I know. That's all I got. Have a good night, and I will catch you kids later. Um, enjoy the game.